Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. With that said, let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, well, it's pretty straightforward. One of the best coaching jobs in all of college basketball is officially open. We talked about it a few weeks ago when Chris Mack and Louisville lost to Pitt. I said, look, this guy is on the hot seat. Things aren't going well. It hits it reaches kind of a boiling point earlier this week. Chris Mack, as of Wednesday at about 3 p.m. Eastern, has officially resigned as Louisville's head coach. And as I just said a minute ago, now one of the best coaching jobs in all of college basketball is open. Is it number one? Is it number two? I don't think so. But it is probably, in the bigger picture, one of the top 10 jobs in college basketball. No state cares about college basketball more than Louisville. Few programs are covered on a day-to-day, 365-day-a-year basis like Louisville is. They play in a great arena. They play in the ACC. They play in front of 19,000 fans at the Yum Center. They are essentially an NBA team in a college town. A college team playing essentially as an NBA team. They're covered like an NBA team. They play in an NBA arena. They travel, facilities, all that good stuff. It is worth noting, though, before we get into the actual candidates for this job, there are some very unique caveats to what is going on at Louisville right now. And so while we can sit here and say, right now, this is one of the top 10 jobs in college basketball, it does come with some caveats that make it, frankly, not as appealing as it should be. First of all, the school is still under NCAA investigation dating all the way back to the Rick Pitino, Brian Bowen thing. You may not remember it, but that was 5 years ago, and we still have not gotten a resolution on the Rick Pitino, Brian Bowen thing. And so any coach who wants this job is going to have to navigate that and acknowledge that some kind of NCAA sanctions could be coming. Now, it didn't stop Chris Mack from taking this job 4 years ago, but you just never know. You don't know what's coming. And to ask a head coach to leave a really, really, really good job to come to Louisville in the middle of an impending NCAA investigation, an ongoing NCAA investigation, like, that's a big deal. That is a big deal, and it is going to scare some guys away that say, look, I got something real good here, and maybe I'm not interested. Maybe I can use Louisville to get a raise, but I'm comfortable staying where I am. The other thing, and I think this is really big, and this is one of those where, like, you just throw out these big names, and you think, oh, this guy would take it, this guy would take it. Well, here's the thing about Louisville at this particular moment right now. Louisville, as I record here, does not have a full-time athletic director. They do not have an in-place athletic director. It's currently an interim athletic director. They currently have an interim school president. And so if they don't scramble really quick to get those pieces in place, it is going to be really hard to attract an elite candidate for this coaching job. Because the bottom line remains, good coaches are not going to leave where they are right now to come to a place where they don't know who they're working for, who's going to be their boss in a year, 2 years, 6 months, whatever. And so Louisville really, the search that Louisville fans really should be focusing on is get an AD in place, then you worry about your basketball coach. Because right now, to say that there's any real quote-unquote, it's just factually incorrect, doesn't mean that we can't speculate on who may or may not be interested, who may or may not be a right fit. But until Louisville gets that AD in place, it's hard to speculate this guy would take it, this guy wouldn't take it, whatever. With that said, Louisville is still a great job, and so let's get into some candidates that I think some might be interested, some might not be, who's realistic, who's not, all that good stuff. And I will tell you, the guy that I actually think is probably atop the list is not the sexiest name. And some people won't think much of it. Some people will think it's a good fit. Some people think it makes sense. I think the number one candidate right now is Kenny Payne. For people who don't know, Kenny Payne, a current New York Knicks assistant. Kenny Payne played at Louisville during the glory days under Denny Crum, and Kenny Payne coached at Kentucky under John Calipari as an assistant for years. And why I think Kenny Payne makes sense is for a few reasons. First of all, he is a guy that has clear Louisville ties. He is a guy that was in the program at its height, at its peak in the 80s. I think it's going to resonate with a big portion of the fan base. On top of that, it's worth noting, He's in the NBA. There's going to be no huge buyout to get him out of his current contract. And so because of it, I think it makes a lot of sense. And he is a guy that you can go out, you can offer him the job, and I don't see the scenario where he says no. There's not a lot of hiccups. There's not a lot of holdups. There's not a lot of, the buyout, whatever. On top of that, you know what I really like about Kenny Payne? I like the fact that he has basically lived in the Louisville-Kentucky rivalry almost his entire adult life, right? Played there again in the 80s under Denny Crum, coached under Calipari for close to a decade. He understands what that job entails. And even Chris Mack, if you go back and listen to his quotes at the end of his reign, his final, kind of statements as Louisville's head basketball coach on Wednesday afternoon, he kind of said, look, I knew the expectations were high. I didn't live up to them, almost acknowledging that I don't really know that I knew what I walked into. Well, Kenny Payne is going to know that. Kenny Payne has been part of this rivalry. And his credit, Kenny Payne is recruited at the highest level of college basketball. He has been in the homes, and he has signed players that are good enough to win national championships. And that is going to be important to get Louisville back to where they could be as a program, one of the top programs in college basketball. And so I know it's not sexy. I know it's not fun to talk about an assistant coach from the NBA, but I think to me, he is the guy that makes the most sense. Now, from there, you start to peel back the layers and you start to talk about guys that could make sense, that are maybe bigger names, that maybe make more sense, that would be better hires, but the question becomes, can you get them? First one that comes to mind for me, Mick Cronin at UCLA. And for people who, he'd never leave UCLA for Louisville. A couple things. One, he's from the area, right? Coached at Cincinnati forever. Coached at Murray State. He was actually an assistant coach under Rick Pitino at Louisville. That matters. He has been around that program. He knows how good that program can be. And I do think there's a lot of people outside of college basketball that maybe only know Louisville the last 7, 8, 9 years. Scandal. Rick Pitino gets fired. Chris Mack's a mess. Mick Cronin was there when it was really good. And Mick Cronin knows what that program can be and knows what it's like to have, obviously the KFC Yum Center was not open when he was there, but knows what it's like to have 19,000 screaming fans. Mick Cronin, having been at UCLA for a few years, he knows what it's like to coach on that big stage. I think he relishes it. You could see how much he enjoyed coaching in that huge game on Saturday. On Tuesday night, UCLA versus Arizona. I think he is a guy that would love that big stage, would be excited about that big stage, and I think it makes sense from a geographical perspective. It's also worth noting, you never know if he'd be willing to leave UCLA, but he has been very public about not being very happy about some of the protocols at the school. He talked about it when UCLA didn't have fans. Obviously, they had fans back in the stands for the Arizona game. But I just bring it up to say you don't know, and there have obviously been some rumblings that he's not very happy with what's going on at the school as far as COVID is concerned. Of course, to go get Mick Cronin, a couple things. One, is he really going to leave one of the probably 5 best jobs in college basketball at UCLA? Best program in the Pac-12, brand new practice facility, maybe the best recruiting base in the country in Southern California. Is he going to leave that? On top of that, even if he's interested in Louisville, is he going to leave if he doesn't get if there isn't an AD in place to hire him? Is he really going to leave UCLA to come back home, to go to Louisville, to go to a school that doesn't have an AD in place? Finally, most importantly, like a lot of the guys on this list, guy's got like an $8 million buyout. And so if you want Mick Cronin, if you want him to even talk to you, you better be ready to pony up the dough because it ain't going to be cheap to get Mick Cronin out of UCLA. So he is one that I could see the scenario that if the buyout was a little bit less or if the AD was in place, I could actually see him being interested in that job. I do wonder, though, about some of the hurdles. I do wonder about the reality of getting him out of that buyout. I do wonder about the reality of getting him to Louisville without a full-time AD. And frankly, it's the same with the next candidate. It's Bruce Pearl. And I'll be blunt. I had Bruce Pearl on my podcast this week, and mostly we talked about being number 1 in the country, how awesome it is, how proud he is of his team. But I did do the due diligence of asking him about other coaching opportunities. And he flat out said, look, man, you know what? I'm focused on this year, blah, 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 this and that. And he does not strike. If you watch that game on Saturday, he does not strike me as a guy that is anything other than over the moon about what's going on at Auburn. But what I do think is worth noting on Bruce Pearl is the same thing that I just said on Mick Cronin. Like, yeah, the idea of Bruce Pearl at Louisville sounds great. It sounds incredible. It sounds amazing. It sounds like imagine the energy that Bruce Pearl had at Auburn Arena the other night. Now imagine in front of 20,000 fans in a basketball-mad city, in a basketball-mad state, in the biggest rivalry in college basketball, right on par with North Carolina and Duke, right? I mean, can you imagine? I mean, my buddy Matt Jones, I thought he said it really well on social media on, I guess it was Wednesday morning. He said point blank, he goes, as a Louisville fan, you want to hire a guy that is going to strike fear in your biggest rival. And as a Kentucky guy, Matt covers Kentucky, he says the biggest fear I would have is with Bruce Pearl. And Bruce Pearl, a lot like Mick Cronin, I think would love the stage of being at a school as big as Louisville, a program that cares as much about basketball as Louisville. But when it comes to Bruce Pearl, you got to ask the same questions about Bruce Pearl that you would about Mick Cronin. His buyout is a little bit less. I get all that. But at the same time, when I look at Bruce Pearl, I sit there and say, that guy has the number one team in the country. That guy is going to get a massive raise. First of all, you're going to have to pay $4+ million to buy him out of his contract. Auburn is going to give him any financial, incentive that he wants to stay at Auburn. And so if you're getting him to leave Auburn, you're going to have to pay him a ton of money on top of what you already paid Chris Mack for a buyout, and on top of the fact that you're going to have to pay his buyout at Auburn as well. And so I know it sounds great, and imagine Bruce Pearl in the painted chest going head-to-head with Calipari. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying that's one that feels great on paper, that I'm not totally sure that it is all that realistic. And what I would say is, once you get past those first three, Kenny Payne, Mick Cronin, Bruce Pearl, it starts to get a little bit dicey. I saw Nate Oates' name linked to this job. I'm just going to tell you, Nate Oates ain't getting this job. And Nate Oates ain't getting this job Nate Oates has the biggest buyout out of anybody on this list. I saw it reported somewhere at 12. I've actually read it's closer to like 9.8. But you're going to have to pay 8 figures just to get Nate Oates away from Alabama to come to your school, let alone what you're going to have to pay him once you get there. Nate Oates, I don't think, is realistic. Eric Musselman's kind of in the same camp. $8+ million at Arkansas to get him out of his contract, if I read his contract right. And by the way, I did a ton of contract Googling here on a Wednesday morning trying to figure out contracts and this and that. So he's another one that I don't think makes sense. And then from there, you kind of get to some of the small school guys. I saw Eric Crawford, a local reporter in Louisville, suggest that Scotty Davenport, he coaches at Bellarmine. Bellarmine is a school that is transitioning from D2 to D1. Scotty Davenport is a longtime Louisville native. Scotty Davenport, like I said, he actually not only led Bellarmine to a national championship in D2, but on top of that, it is worth noting as well that he coached under Denny Crum. He was an assistant under Denny Crum, so he has deep ties to the school. I saw Eric Crawford suggest maybe he being a 2, 3, 4-year stopgap, him being a guy to kind of fill in the void, get the program back on its feet, and then when it's in better shape, you go ahead and go hire somebody else. But he has been very successful on the court. It is worth noting, like I said, 3 Division II Final Fours, a Division II National Championship. Bellarmine is transitioning into D1. They actually finished second in their conference last year. And then, oh, by the way, in conference play this year, they are 5-1, 11-9 overall. So he's a really accomplished coach in the area. That one kind of makes sense. I also thought of Matt McMahon, the head coach at Murray State. Murray State's kind of been a cradle for coaches. Mick Cronin coached there for a while. Mark Gottfried coached there. Steve Prohm coached there. And that's a guy that, to me, right now, Murray's 18-2 this season. They are rolling. He's been to, I believe, 2 NCAA tournaments in the last 3 years. He obviously coached and developed John Morant. Would that be a sexy name for Louisville? It wouldn't be. But again, it comes down to who is going to be available, who is going to be willing to leave a job that they currently have for a job like Louisville where we don't know who the AD is going to be, who we don't know who the president is going to be, things like that. I saw a couple other candidates. Brad Underwood, okay, I get it. Again, a lot of money, big buyout, all that good stuff. Is he leaving? Steve Forbes, it feels like he may eventually someday leave Wake Forest, but it's year one. It's year 2 at Wake Forest, year 1 of a ton of success. The interesting thing about Steve Forbes is he actually has a ton of ties all over the country, and so because of that, he coached in Florida and he coached at Tennessee with Bruce Pearl, ironically enough. And so, Tennessee fans want him as their next coach. Memphis fans want him as their next head coach. He's got ties to so he's a guy that could end up anywhere. I just don't know that he's leaving Wake after 2 years. But those are the guys. Those are the guys that come to mind. I will give you one more name. I don't know if anybody else has mentioned this. It's just a name that I thought of. And I personally like it. It's a call that I would make personally. That's Mark Pope at BYU. I don't know if Mark Pope would take it, and here's why. Because Mark Pope, a couple different reasons. One, BYU's going to the Big 12 here in a couple years. He's going to be a Power 5, Power 6 coach, and he's going to be a Power 5, Power 6 coach in a great league where if he does well, he's going to have easy access to the NCAA tournament. No more WCC, no more having a fight, no more hoping to get an at-large bid if you don't beat Gonzaga. He's going to be in a Power 5. The other big thing is, I think, he's probably got his eyes on Kentucky for after John Calipari leaves. Kentucky is his alma mater. Would he really leave Louisville would he really leave BYU for Kentucky's biggest rival? It's worth noting, by the way, who coached at Louisville before Chris Mack was obviously Rick Pitino. Rick Pitino had a bad ending at Louisville. Would Mark Pope go behind his alma mater's back? Would he go behind his mentor's back and take the Louisville job? I don't know. But as I said, this is going to be a fascinating one to follow. And I think the biggest thing for me is to monitor who you believe or monitor who ends up as the next AD. Because I think before we start having realistic conversations on who is actually really a candidate and who isn't, we first have to figure out who the AD is. And if they can't get an AD in place by the time this search really ramps up, good luck finding a coach. It's also worth noting, by the way, Maryland is open. Maryland has an AD. Maryland has a president in place, and that job is really good as well. So a lot of these candidates are going to overlap, and there's always a chance that somebody that might take Louisville will get offered Maryland and take that one instead. But with that said, that's kind of my ideas, my rundown of kind of the situation at Louisville. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to go ahead and subscribe to the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast YouTube channel. If you're asking me for an answer today, I do believe Kenny Payne will be the next head coach at Louisville.